Good evening, and welcome to everyone who has joined us here tonight for tonight's Ruth Gay Seminar in Jewish Studies. This program was established in 2008 thanks to a major gift from the family of Ruth Gay, and it was named in honor of the renowned American Jewish historian Ruth Gay, who passed away in 2006. This seminar series has been highly successful in providing an opportunity for scholars and writers and members of various cultural communities to share their research with the wider public. Since YIVO's reestablishment in New York in the early 1940s, after the original YIVO in Vilna was occupied by Nazi forces, the collections in the YIVO archives have been available almost daily to the public and have served as the inspiration for thousands of books, articles, films about Jewish life and culture. Part of YIVO's unique contribution to the public has been to interface with the many different groups whose heritage is reflected amongst its rich and vast archival holdings. Over the decades of its existence, YIVO has collected and documented the history of cultural, religious, political, and social groups, and the heritage of the Karliner Hasidim is included in this rich mosaic of documents and artifacts. The Ruth Gay Seminar is a way of bringing the world of the researcher and the public together. It's a way of sharing the unusual and special experiences of researchers with a wider community, and also of sparking dialogue and discussion on new topics of research. For this opportunity, YIVO expresses its deepest appreciation to the family of Ruth Gay for its generous support of this program and for making this important lecture series possible. We have with us in the audience today a member of the family of Ruth Gay's sister, Shirley Gorenstein. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for your continued support. As usual, to bring together tonight's audience, we've reached out to the public in the tri-state area as well as to the academic community. We've contacted the CUNY colleges such as Brooklyn College, Touro College, Graduate Jewish Studies, New York University, Fordham University, and other schools, and we would like to welcome those here today from those institutions. We also take this opportunity to greet YIVO members who have joined us here tonight, and we welcome members of the Jewish Genealogical Society of New York group on Facebook, the Polish Jewish Matters and the Holocaust on Facebook, Hasafran, and members of other online communities who are attending this lecture. I would like to thank everyone who helped make this program possible. Dr. Jonathan Brent, Executive Director of YIVO, who could not be with us tonight because there was another event uptown at the Museum of the City of New York, but he sends his warm greetings. Dr. Mila Shalochova, Head Librarian and Acting Chief Archivist. My colleague, Etty Goldwasser, whose dedicated and hard work has contributed significantly to the general success of the Ruth Gay Seminar since its inception in 2008. I would also like to thank the staff of the Center for Jewish History and Jonathan Lamb, who runs the audiovisual department, as well as Michael, tonight's videographer. The subject of tonight's program relates to the cultural and musical legacy of the Karliner Hasidim, who are also known as the Stolin Hasidim. You will hear more about this unique heritage tonight from our two presenters, Dr. Yitzhak Melamed and Mr. Jonathan Rothmans. The YIVO Archives and Library hold a wide range of materials relating to Hasidism and to the Karliner Hasidim in particular. The papers of the historian Simon Dubnov, who was a founder of YIVO, include rare documents about the history of Hasidism. One of these rare documents will be shown at tonight's presentation. The papers of Abraham Bernstein include many pages of handwritten music collected by Bernstein in his capacity as cantor in the Great Synagogue of Vilna, as a member of the Ansky Society of Vilna, and his capacity as an ethnomusicologist who traveled to towns and cities in eastern Poland and spoke to the court composers of the Hasidim and wrote down their music. Following in the footsteps of Ansky, who led a 3-year expedition from 1911 to 1914 to collect a large archive of original material about Jewish life, Bernstein continued the Ansky tradition, and his papers, which were given to the YIVO Institute in Vilna before World War II, are a rich resource for serious students of Jewish music. The YIVO Library also holds An original DVD of some of the music collected by Ansky during the 1911-1914 expedition, the originals of which are in the Vernadsky Library in Kiev on the original wax cylinders. The library also holds the published works of Abraham Bernstein, whom we just mentioned earlier, and books by Moshe Beregovsky and others who worked on ethnomusicology. Before asking Dr. Melamed to come up and greet you and speak to you, I'd like to say a few words of introduction. Professor Melamed is a professor of philosophy and Jewish studies at Johns Hopkins University and the author of Spinoza's Metaphysics, published by Oxford University Press in 2013, and co-editor of Spinoza's Theological Political Treatise, A Critical Guide, published by Cambridge University Press in 2011, Spinoza and German Idealism, Cambridge University Press in 2012. In Jewish studies, Dr. Melamed is working on Hasidism, early modern rabbinics, medieval and modern Jewish philosophy, and cultural studies. And before we go ahead, I just also like to introduce you to Mr. Jonathan Rothmans, who was a classical violinist and a musician and artist, as we could hear when he was starting the evening off and he was doing his rehearsal. He's a freelance violinist who specializes in classical music and has played other genres of music as well, including Hasidic and popular Jewish music. So let's welcome our presenters and especially Dr. Yitzhak Melamed.
Thank you for this generous presentation. I'll begin with a couple of things. I'll tell you just how this evening came about. About 3 months ago, I got an email from Fruma asking me if I met Fruma several times over the past 6-7 years when I have been searching for some of the materials related to Stalin, and you'll get some more information about these materials or about this collection of manuscripts. And I think it was in late December that Fruma asked me if I might be interested in giving a presentation about the state of the research after these Karliner manuscripts, and I said basically yes. I told her that I need to ask. I mean, I'll talk with the Karliner Rebbe, ask what he thinks about it, but I also said there is going to be a deal. I'm going to come free. I'll do everything, whatever she asked, but my condition was that I'll get 1 day of a team of YIVO researchers working with me in order to check YIVO Archives, what we can find in terms of Hasidic music and Karliner music and Hasidic manuscripts. And I can just tell you that Fruma kept her side of the deal meticulously. I mean, it was fantastic. I mean, last week, Tuesday, Rabbi Yossel and Aaron Heusman came with me, and Jonathan Rothmans. We all came just as a small team on the Karliner side. I think we had a nice team of 4 or 5 librarians in music, in various other, working with us for something like 7-8 hours. The result was fantastic. I mean, right now we already redeemed, I think, 1 nigun. I'll tell you a bit more about that, or I think that Jonathan will tell you more about it. I was really amazed. I mean, I think specifically I really have to commend Fruma because I think she stayed for a couple of nights over the past week, just till 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock at night, just sending us urgent emails whether this is okay and that is fine and everything is just doing well, is going well. So I'm really grateful. And so I would like to thank Fruma Morer, Etty Goldwasser, who did a lot of work, Shmuel Klein, who helped us a lot, Lawrence Klamberg, who helped us with the digitization of the music and just searching their musical archives. Of course, I have to my colleagues, Rabbi Aaron and Yossel Heusman, with whom we worked in searching the archives of YIVO last week. And, well, you'll see. Jonathan, who will run the second half of the presentation. Okay. Other than that, of course, I would like to thank the family of Ruth Gay for their generous support, which allowed for this very event to take place. I mean, thank you very much. Okay. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a standard piece of nomenclature in contemporary American culture. PTG, post-traumatic growth, the positive twin sibling of PTSD, is a relatively new term referring to the manner in which communities and individuals experience spiritual growth in response to adverse, frequently radically adverse circumstances. My talk today will address the attempt of one religious community, that of the Karlin Hasidim, to recover and reestablish itself in the wake of the Holocaust, in which the vast majority of this community and its leadership were murdered. It is hard, indeed impossible, to tell the story of a religious community whose history ranges over a period of a quarter of a millennium, especially not in 30 minutes, but that's what we have to do. In the limited amount of time I have, I will restrict myself to a few highlights, focusing primarily on three crises in the life of this community. In order to establish some common ground, let me begin with a brief characterization of this community. The school of Karlin Hasidim is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, of Hasidic groups. The gravitational center of the community until World War II was in Eastern Europe, in the areas of today's Ukraine, Belarus, and some areas of Poland and Lithuania. Remarkably, the community established a presence in Palestine already in the 18th century. I mean, we're talking about either 1770 or 1778, but pretty early. And by the late 19th century, a new and growing center had been established in the shores of this land, on the shores of this land. As you can imagine, it has been these two centers in the land of Israel and the US that have facilitated the revival of the community in the wake of the Holocaust. There are three distinct characteristics of this community that may help introduce it. First, from its inception, the community has a presence in Lithuania, and with the development of the Lithuanian analytic method of Talmudic inquiry and analysis in the late 19th century, the community adopted the Lithuanian hyper-intellectualist style of learning. Second, the Karliner Hasidim are one of the few Hasidic communities that preserved the early Hasidic custom of loud, ecstatic prayer. Okay. Finally, the early presence of the Hasidic community in Palestine brought about unique and surprising synergies. Thus, the Palestinian branch of the community developed a musical tradition with a strong Oriental overtones. Similarly, the Eretz Yisrael Hasidim had a close and sometimes intense relationship with the local Sephardi Kabbalists. Thus, one can find today several families of Karliner Hasidim in Yerushalayim that claim to be descendants of the Chida. Now, whether the claim is justified or not, I mean, I'm not going to judge. The Chida was a towering Sephardic rabbi of the late 18th century. Strikingly, on several crucial issues of religious practice, the Karliner Hasidim in the land of Israel followed a Sephardic custom out of respect to Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Sephardic author of the Chief Rabbinic Code, and the eminent rabbinic authority in the land of Israel in the early modern period. So, for example, the Karliner Hasidim in Eretz Israel, in Israel, they bench only one blessing on tefillin, while those which are outside of Eretz Israel are basically following the common Ashkenazic minhag rather than the Sephardic one. Right? It's pretty unique as far as I know. With this brief introduction in hand, let us approach the first of these three crises in the history of the community. Part one, how to establish a continuity of a religious community. Rabbi Aaron HaGodol, Rabbi Aaron the Great, the founder of the Karlin-Stolin School of Hasidism, was one of the closest and oldest disciples of the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Dov Ber Friedman. Rabbi Aaron HaGodol was a charismatic figure who brought the new teachings of Hasidism to Pinsk and Lithuania, the stronghold of the opposition to Hasidism. Karlin, a suburb of Pinsk, was the center of his activity, and it is indeed testimony to his wide influence that by the last quarter of the 18th century, Karliners became the common appellation for all Hasidim, right? It was just the name of Hasidim in general, both among the Russian authorities and among East European Jews. In 1792, 1793, when Solomon Maimon published his Lebensgeschichte, which included a lengthy chapter on the emergence of the Hasidic movement, he referred to two places as the centers of the new movement, Mezrich and Karlin. I would also add that Maimon describes a certain figure that is very charismatic and is legislating all kinds of regulations to communities. It's very likely that this figure is Rabbi Aaron HaGodol. I mean, it's still a matter of debate, but I think it's very likely. Rabbi Aaron is the author of the devotional liturgical poem Ka Echsov that is sung by the Hasidim during the meals of Friday night and during the final meal of the Sabbath at twilight on Saturday. Among the Karliner Hasidim, the common title for this song is the Zemer, literally, the song. No one would confuse any other song with a Zemer. Just as for the medievals, the title, the philosopher, was just an exclusive designation for Aristotle, right? So the Zemer, it's just one specific song. It is worth noting that Ka Echsov is, as far as I know, the only textual contribution of Hasidism to the canonical hymns, to the Zmirot of the Sabbath, right? Of course, the only other example perhaps would be Gott von Abraham of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Oberdicher, but it's not a poem. It's a text. It's a really interesting text, but it's not a Zmirah, I think. Of course, there are thousands of Hasidic melodies for the hymns of the Sabbath, but unlike previous generations of Kabbalists, Hasidic masters did not write Zmirot for the Sabbath, with this unique exception. Another distinctive feature of the activity of Rabbi Aaron HaGodol was his care for the poor, as we have detailed evidence of regulations he dictated to certain communities in order to defend the poor from oppression and hardship. Rabbi Aaron died during the Passover of 1772, when he was only 36 years old, and while his teacher, the Maggid, was still alive. The time of his death coincided with one of the most ferocious campaigns against the Hasidim, and Karlin was literally in the eye of the storm. At his death, Rabbi Aaron left one son in Karlin, Rabbi Osher, who was 12 years old, and another son, Rabbi Yaakov, who immigrated to Palestine a few years earlier, if I'm not mistaken, in 1770, but I think the date is not, it still requires confirmation. It was clear that the Hasidic community in Karlin needed a leader in order to weather the anti-Hasidic campaign, and the person who replaced Rabbi Aaron as the leader of the community was his disciple and friend Rab Shlomo of Karlin, who was only 2 years younger than Rabbi Aaron himself, and just like Rabbi Aaron, was one of the members of the close circle of the Maggid. Rab Shlomo of Karlin led the Hasidic community for 20 years. This was not an easy period, as the campaign against the Hasidim was at its height. In 1792, Rab Shlomo was murdered by a Russian soldier, and Rab Asher, the 32 years old son of Rabbi Aaron HaGodol, took the reign of leadership. Part 2, Interregnum. Okay. The period of leadership which transpired under Rabbi Asher I and his son Rabbi Aaron II was a period of significant intellectual and demographic growth. By the end of this period, I would say 1870, the number of Hasidim visiting the Rebbe's court in Stolin at the time for the festivals was between 3,000 and 4,000. That's quite a lot. We don't have many similar figures in other courts. This growth is even more remarkable given the strongly anti-Hasidic environment in the area of Pinsk Karlin. Rabbi Aaron II was born on the new moon of the Jewish month of Sivan, 1802. He ascended to the leadership of the community shortly after the death of his father, Rabbi Asher, in 1826, leading the community of a period of almost 50 years during the second and third quarters of the 19th century. He was forced to move from his town of Karlin due to a misnagdic complaint to the Russian authority, who responded by a decree ordering him to leave Karlin. Reb Aaron moved to his court to the town of Stolin, which became the center of the community during the late 19th century and the early 20th century, hence the name Karlin-Stolin, right? Reb Aaron nurtured a small branch of the community that resided in Palestine and considered these Hasidim as highly precious members of the community. We have testimonies of the visits of the Hasidim coming from Palestine for the high holidays, and we know that basically Reb Aaron would, once the group of the Hasidim coming from Palestine would come to his court, he would just leave everything, literally, said, these are my most precious people, and he'll just dedicate, first of all, a couple of hours just to speak with them and ask what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. It seems that it was during Reb Aaron's lifetime that the outstanding Karliner collection of books, manuscripts, and artifacts was formed, though many of the Hasidic items in the collection came from his ancestors. During the 19th century, the Karliner community in Palestine bought various books and manuscripts in Seifed and Jerusalem. Among these items were, and I give you just a random list. I mean, it's not a random, but it's a list of definitely not complete. So here are some of the items. So we have the Pledge of Allegiance of the disciples of the Ari, right, the 16th century Kabbalist. There was a similar Pledge of Allegiance from the disciples of the Radbaz, which apparently included also the signature of the Ari. But again, we don't have a copy of that. I'll explain to you how we got this copy. An early printed copy of the Tur, a major rabbinic legal code with annotations of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now that's basically, if you're not coming from the rabbinic background, to get a copy of the Tur with annotation of Rabbi Yosef Karo is roughly like getting a copy of Plato with the comments of Aristotle, right? I mean, you don't have that. I mean, simply it's items that they are impossible to, I mean, you cannot value them. Literally, you cannot value them. A Kabbalistic manuscript by Rabbi Yaakov Tzemach, the disciple of Rabbi Shmuel Vital, the son of Rabbi Chaim Vital, a major Kabbalist. A handwritten siddur by the Damascus Kabbalist Rabbi Shmuel Vital, the son of Rabbi Chaim Vital. And a handwritten siddur by the Yemenite and Jerusalem Kabbalist Rabbi Shalom Sharabi. Okay. According to contemporary testimonies, the acquisition and reception of these extraordinary items were celebrated in special processions similar to the traditional processions honoring the introduction of a new Torah scroll. The death of Reb Aaron II in 1872, after 46 years of leadership, was undoubtedly a major blow to the Hasidic community. But this blow turned into an existential crisis when Reb Aaron's only son, Reb Asher II, commonly called among the Hasidim the young Rebbe, died unexpectedly a few months later. At his death, Reb Asher left a 5-year-old son, and the void generated by the departure of the two Rebbes in less than a year was hard, if not impossible, to fill. In a series of outstanding articles by Avraham Abi Shor, the prominent historian of Karlin Hasidim and a close friend of roughly all of us, has meticulously traced the results of this crisis. The plan to publish a book with the teachings of Reb Aaron II, the Beis Aaron, and his ancestors, which had seemingly been initiated at the end of Reb Aaron's life, now acquired a new urgency. Within 2 years after the perishing of Reb Aaron and Reb Asher, the first edition of the book, titled Beis Aaron, the House of Aaron, appeared in Brody in 1875. Okay. Now, the truth is that the name Beth Aaron itself was originally, of course, related to the first Karliner Rebbe, Reb Aaron HaGodel, because we know that if I'm not mistaken, the synagogue in Tiberia, which was erected in 1870, so still during the lifetime of Reb Aaron II, was named Beis Aaron after the first Rebbe, Reb Aaron HaGodel. The Dubnov collection, right, which is part of the YIVO Archives, contain one of the two known manuscripts of the book, of the Besaun. The Besaun is the central Hasidic book, or book of Hasidic thought of the Karlin Hasidim. So let's see a few. So here you have the scanning of the first edition, 1875. Here you have the YIVO manuscript. So it's content, that's one of the first pages. That's a signature still from Vilnius. Oddly enough, the manuscript was purchased in the early 20th century in Lodz. Now, Lodz will become a major center for the Hasidim, but by the early 20th century, I don't know why, but how the manuscript of the Besaun came to Lodz in the early 20th century, but that's where the manuscript was purchased and sent to Dubnov. Okay, part 3, the Churban. Rabbi Yisrael Perlov, the 5-year-old son of Rabbi Asher II, became the epicenter of the community at a very young age, hence his common name, the Yenuka of Stolin. We have no time here to discuss the upbringing and education, his upbringing and education. Here again, I have to refer you to the superb work of my teacher and friend, Rabbi Abi Shor. Rabbi Yisrael led the community into the 20th century. He encouraged the establishment of Hasidic communities in the New World and expanded the Stoliner treasury of books and manuscripts. Thus, we know that he acquired in Drobich a copy of the first printing of the Reef, which was part of the 1522 Bomberg edition, or it was an appendix to the 1522 Bomberg edition of the Talmud, a copy which was annotated in the handwriting of Rab Moshe Isserlich, the Ramah. One interesting piece of testimony we have about the role of music in Rabbi Yisrael's court is that when his 6 sons grew up, they used to play classical quartets during Motzei Shabbos, after the traditional melodies for the meal of Melamed Malka. Another interesting practice that apparently was initiated during his lifetime was the introduction of new melodies for the Zemer, for Ka'ersov. The new melodies would be first introduced during Rosh Hashanah, and one would be sung to the words of the verse following the blowing of the shofar, Hayom Rasulam. That's why the other name that the Karliners are having for the melodies for Ka'ersov, apart from the Zemer, it would be just ayams, right? It's just Hayom Rasulam. So it's the nigunim that will begin with these words from the verses following the blowing of the shofar. In this manner, the frequent repetition of these melodies during the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah would allow the audience attending the prayer to learn the new melodies. So it's a wonderful practice. I mean, you just have 2 days in which people are supposed to sing the same melody for something like 4 or 6 times. What could be best practice in order to introduce a new melody? The melodies initiated during the service of Rosh Hashanah would be frequently sung throughout the following year to the words of Ka'ersov. In this manner, the assembly of Karlin melodies constantly expanded. Rabbi Yisrael died on the Rosh Hashanah of 1921 in Bad Neuheim, next to Frankfurt am Main. Of his 6 sons, 3, Rabbi Avrum Elimelech, Rabbi Moshe, and Rabbi Yochanan, established Hasidic centers in Poland, in Karlin-Stolin and Lutsk, respectively. And another son, Rabbi Yaakov Chaim, led a small community in Williamsburg, New York. Apart from the very few items that Rabbi Yaakov Chaim brought to Williamsburg when he immigrated to the US, the bulk of the collection of manuscripts, books, and artifacts remained intact, kept in the cellar of the house of Rabbi Moshe in Stolin, until it was plundered by a Nazi unit in 1941 or 42. We don't know the exact date. We basically have a window of 6 months where this act of plundering probably took place. Here's the photo of the Frankfurter, the Yenuka, I mean, already in older age, of course. That's a photo of Moshe Perlov, who was the rabbi in Stolin. the Rebbe in Stolin. Here's a photo of Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Perlov, who was the Rebbe in Williamsburg. Now, that's a cellar. That's a place where the collection of the manuscripts was housed, probably for something like 40 years. The picture is taken just 4 years ago. During the 1930s, the academic scholars of Hasidism discovered the trove and mistitled the Stoliner Geniza. Now, why they use the term Geniza is a good question. I might have time to discuss it in the Q&A. It was first Dubnov who announced the discovery of the collection in his 1929 History of Hasidism. Then, in 1935, Gershon Scholem published an article in Zion on one of the manuscripts in this collection. Scholem and Wolf Rabinovich, the author of the only scholarly book on Karlin-Lithuanian Hasidism, I'm saying both Karlin and Lithuanian Hasidism because the original book, which appeared in 1934 in Tel Aviv in German, was titled Karlin Hasidism. Very few people are aware of this German edition. It was reissued in a slightly expanded edition in 1960 in Hebrew and then shortly afterwards in English. At that time, after the war, the change was from Karlin Hasidism to Lithuanian Hasidism. There was another important change. I'll just mention it briefly. The very ending of the German book was some sort of celebration of this, of the success of Zionist youth movement that were, according to Rabinovich, the true inheritors of the Hasidic movement, because they are the place where you can still now hear Hasidic music, basically announcing the death of the Hasidic tradition. In 1960, when the Hasidim actually died, I mean, they were no longer alive, he changed this ending. I mean, he would not say this kind of, I mean, it's change of half page, nothing more than that. But by 1960, he cannot write these kind of things. And the ending of the Hebrew text and the English text that afterwards appeared is much more mild, much less arrogant. Okay. Okay. Now, one interesting thing is that these two guys, well, not two guys, but Rabinovich and Scholem employed in Stolin a high school teacher by the name of David Bachlinsky, who was granted permission by the Rebbe, Rav Moshe, to examine the collection in Stolin on several occasions during the 1930s. And these are actually letters by this researcher that is working, this high school teacher working in Stolin and sending his reports. Due to these letters and another report we have from within Hasidic sources from 1938, we have a pretty good inventory of what was there, right? So we have both internal and external testimonies about the content of the collection. The fate of the community of Stolin-Karlin Hasidim during the Holocaust was grim. The proportion of Jews exterminated in the areas of Poland populated by Karlin-Stolin Hasidim was between 95 and 98. It's unbelievable, but these are the numbers. Of the 6 sons of Rabbi Yisrael Perlov, the Frankfurter, 4 were murdered by the Nazis. One of the other sons, Rabbi Yaakov Chaim, who led the community in Williamsburg, died in 1946 in Detroit, hence he is named the Detroiter, leaving no children. The remaining son, Rabbi Yochanan Perlov, ran away from the Nazis twice, in 1939 and 1941. During his second flight, he went all the way till Bishkek, probably a name that place you would never recognize, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, where he found refuge till the end of the war. In the summer of 1945, he and his only surviving daughter traveled from Bishkek to Poland and then to the DP camps in Feldafing, next to Munich. An American emissary who was looking for him at the DP camps identified him, though at first Rabbi Yochanan insisted on concealing his identity. Later, in 1946, he immigrated to Palestine and spent his time between the 2 surviving communities of Karliner Hasidim in the US and in Palestine. Rabbi Yochanan died in 1956 and was buried in Tiberias, among the first Hasidic rabbis who immigrated to Palestine towards the end of the 18th century. He was survived by a daughter and a one-year-old grandson. At the time, many believed that this was the end of Karlin Hasidism. This was indeed, literally, the judgment of Wolf Rabinovich, who published in 1960 the Hebrew version of his book on Karlin Hasidim. However, what many would have deemed at the time as simply impossible became a reality. And under the leadership of the grandson of Rabbi Yochanan, the community emerged from the ashes, and in the past 30 years it has been struggling to reclaim its cultural heritage in music and writing. The YIVO collections are very rich in both of these domains, and indeed several Karliner melodies which were discovered in the YIVO Archives have become part of the musical fabric of today's living community. I think that just last week, probably in Tuesday, we found another nigun. I mean, that basically was unknown for 60 years. One reason for modest optimism in this regard, the search after the Stoliner treasury of books and manuscripts is still ongoing. One reason for modest optimism in this regard is the fact that two items belonging to the Stoliner collection surfaced in the Judaica market after the war. The mark of the collection we are searching after is this signature. Let me see. See? That's one. Karlin-Stolin. Please let us know if you ever encounter an item with this signature. So about 7 years ago, we had a similar session at the World Congress of Jewish Studies, a session that was dedicated to the Stoliner Gniza. And there were quite a few librarians that came there. And then 2 years ago, I got a phone call from Binyamin Lukin, one of the senior librarians at the National Archives in Jerusalem. He found some interesting letter. What was the letter? So it was a letter with 3 telegrams. The letter was from Wolf Rabinovich, the person who wrote the book on the history of Karlin Hasidim, who in 1964 met the Machnovka Rebbe, who just immigrated to Palestine from Moscow. Now, the Machnovka Rebbe was befriended and knew well the chief rabbi of Moscow, person by the name Leib Levin. So Rabinovich is writing to Rabbi Levin and asking him in 1964 to help find the Stoliner Gniza. What happens afterwards is quite amazing because we have the telegrams a day after Rabbi Levin gets a letter. He sends an urgent telegram to the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Moscow asking them to start looking for the Karliner collection. Then we have another telegram 2 days later. This time it's a telegram from the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Moscow to the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Minsk, asking the local authorities to help find this collection. Another 4 days later, we have another telegram. We have scans of all these items. This time it's from the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Minsk to the local gubernia in Stolin, trying to ask, please try to find this collection. So for about 4 months, right, we have a bunch of Soviet apparatchiks trying to find these collections. Nothing happened, nothing resulted from that, but it's a nice small story. Thank you very much.
Good evening to all who have taken time out to hear about a subject which has been both maintained and revived in no small part by the YIVO Institute, as well as others for whom Jewish culture is more than a mere hobby, but an actual passion and way of life. First, I'd like to once again thank the family of Ruth Gay for your generous support of this lecture series. perhaps the best way sometimes to continue a person's memory is in such a forum, because in such a forum we're looking to preserve what was and keep it in the future as well. I would like to thank everyone here on behalf of Hasidic Karlin-Stolin worldwide. We'd also like to thank Fruma Morer, not only for her utter selflessness in overseeing so many important and enlightening projects, but also for her graciousness in allowing access to many historic treasures of the Karlin-Stolin Hasidic court. In addition, I'd like to thank Etty Goldwasser for her help in preparing the various prints included in the PowerPoint presentation tonight, as well as the small little touches that she's put on this project as well. Your work is impeccable, and we thank you for it. I'd also like to make special mention of Lauren Sklamberg, who patiently accommodated us in helping us listen to sound files of various Hasidic Nigunim, and who put up with my nervous manner and rewinding and forwarding and rewinding and forwarding, and trying to just get the right place to hear something. Thanks as well to Rabbi Shmuel Klein and to Ludmila Shalachova as well. Your contributions to this project have been essential to its success. Achroin Chaviv, we save those who are close to us for the last. Professor Yitzhak Melamed, who drafted me to be part of the team as one who can hopefully decipher some of the musical treasures which lie in the many, many treasure chests of archives, both here in YIVO and perhaps in other places as well. Your erudition and perseverance in this project has been an inspiration to all of us. Rabbis Yossel and Aaron Heusman, your attention to detail and your passion for getting to the bottom of the story of this illustrious Hasidic court and attempting to recount it as accurately as possible have been fascinating as well as enjoyable to watch. I look forward to many more collaborations in the future. Before I roll the credits for the sources of the music that I'm going to play tonight, I would like to speak a little bit about the meaning of and role that music plays both in Judaism and more specifically in Hasidism, the Hasidic movement. As we've mentioned, a nigun is a tune or a melody. A nigun is difficult to define as belonging to one specific genre of music. Until the inception of the Hasidic movement, the idea of singing or playing instruments had been mentioned both in the written as well as the oral tradition. Until the emergence of the Baal Shem Tov as the founder of Hasidism, music existed but did not play the central role that it began to play when he revived interest in music as an integral part of worship. Different Hasidic groups have their own nigunim, sometimes composed by their Rebbe, spiritual leader, or some other member of that particular Hasidic court. It's sometimes impossible to point to a specific event which inspires a person to compose a nigun. Sometimes it can be triggered by the anticipation of a certain holiday or ritual. Other times it may come as a result of the experiencing of a heightened spiritual state. And still at other times it may just pop into somebody's head spontaneously at any time. Some nigunim are highly meditative. Others are expressions of euphoria, and still others may express emotions associated with longing and hope. Some nigunim, as we'll hear tonight, can also unfortunately be associated with tragedy. Nonetheless, there is one common denominator, the source of a nigun. The source of a nigun is always the human soul. The soul, or neshama, is what distinguishes us as human beings from the material world. Even after so many advances in science and medicine, it is infinitely difficult to describe the effect that singing or playing of a nigun has on a human being. In fact, I recently, just last night, heard a story from a parent of a student of mine. A real unfortunate tragedy that a young man had been injured in Queens playing some sports, and he has been in a medically induced coma because the doctors are not sure what effect sound will have on his brain. Sitting up in Upper Manhattan in one of the finest hospitals in the world, and the greatest doctors cannot determine how much talking will affect his brain. Will it hurt him? Will it heal him? Not sure. And for sure, not the playing of music. They said, don't play any music because we're not sure what it's going to do to him. What distinguishes a nigun from other types of sound, and more specifically music, is that the sound it produces is almost always constant. You will notice this in the manuscripts that we display, as you will in other types of Hasidic music, that there are very few rests or pauses in the music. The sound is continuous and usually very pleasurable, even when the emotion associated with the nigun may not be completely happy, nor may it be expressed in any words. While what you will see here are manuscripts of the music, this music has been passed down from generation to generation. A family heirloom can be lost or destroyed. As long as human beings exist in this world, the nigun can live until the end of time and beyond. It only requires us to remember it and sing it for our progeny. The idea of expressing oneself in song dates back to the very first man, Adam HaRishon. We see examples throughout the Tanakh of song being used in a variety of settings. So the use of song in Judaism is not exclusive to the Hasidic movement. However, when the Hasidic movement began, the masters as well as disciples of the various Hasidic courts used music as a means of achieving a heightened spiritual state. One of the reasons that song was used and even espoused as a means of achieving greater sanctity points to perhaps the main reason that the Baal Shem Tov strove to encourage its use. The Baal Shem Tov felt that it was necessary for spiritual growth to be more inclusive as opposed to exclusive. Certain areas of observance and religious growth seemed unattainable due to the way we had prayed and learned. There are no shortcuts in climbing the spiritual ladder. It requires much toil. There is one exception. Enter the Hasidic nigun. A Hasidic nigun can express many facets of the soul that words cannot express. In fact, even though many Hasidic nigunim may have words, we don't actually sing them very often. They are used as a guide, maybe even a roadmap to our spiritual destination. Hasidic nigun can express euphoria, ecstasy, unbridled joy, not the type which is exhibited during a manic episode. Rather, it is a focused type of rapture which can reach the loftiest places in our spiritual selves and the highest echelons of the spiritual world. On the other hand, a Hasidic nigun can plumb the depths of a soul and survey tragedy, sadness, sorrow, hope, and longing. It is a mean by which we can exhibit the manifestation of any emotion in the lexicon of the Jewish spirit and the human spirit. When one finishes a Hasidic nigun, one never knows where he's ended up. In the Hasidic court of Karlin-Stolin, our leaders always viewed their nigunim as some type of treasure which needs to be preserved and fiercely guarded. Similar to the way much care is taken in preserving art and artifacts, so too have we closely guarded our treasure of nigunim and their potential dissemination. The nigunim that you're going to hear tonight are a small selection of our vast treasure of nigunim. As you can see in the captions, which describe the particular manuscripts, which you're going to see soon, these selections are taken from the Musikalische Pincus. I'm just going to go through the. Okay, so I'll just very quickly scroll through this. So, as we know, Bernstein traveled to Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. He followed in the steps of Ansky, who had led an ethnographic expedition from 1911 to 1914. The YIVO Library also holds a number of books. Here's the Musikalische Pincus. That's what I wanted you to see. Also holds a number of books of Hasidic music, included the music collected by M. Beregovsky, an ethnomusicologist to continue the work of Ansky during the 20s, as was stated before. And as well, there's one more gem that I want you to see. Books by Chemro Vinover, a musicologist who specialized in Jewish music. His books also include some of the music of Stolin Hasidim. And now we're going to give you a sample. The next three pieces, I'm just going to scroll them ahead for you. I'll just show them to you. Starts with the two previous. Our standard fare from the Haggadah, from the Pesach Haggadah. First one is Alachas Kam V'Kam. Next piece is called U'V'chein V'Amartem Zevach Pesach. Now, this piece is not only sung on Pesach, it's also sung on Shabbos afternoon to Baruch Kel Elyon. Shoshanas Yaakov, which is going to be Purim soon, when he's sung on Purim. The next one is written up here, Adir Bimlucha, and it is, true to its name, Majestoso, which means with royalty in a majestic fashion. Next piece is actually also a Tanznigan, but one that we found in one of the I believe the Bergovsky. The next piece of music here has been referred to as Koach Soif, which we spoke about before, although this is not the Koach Soif that we know out in the world, that has been sung extensively in the world. It's a Zemer which was sung at a quite tragic point in the history of Karliner Hasidim, and I'll tell you a little bit about the story. The story goes in the following way. During the Second World War, the Varshaver, Ram Elimelech, was in the Warsaw Ghetto, And he was hid away with his family somewhere in the ghetto. One day, he heard commotion and he saw a Nazi mercilessly beating a pregnant woman. It was a back and forth between him and his family about he wanted to go out and do something and they did not want him to, and finally he could not bear anymore the sight, and he ran out and started screaming at the Nazi, telling him, "Don't you see, don't you have a mother yourself? How could you do, how could you have such cruelty to a person?" At that point, the Nazi shot him, and he lay bleeding. He asked someone to bring him his violin. Don't forget, he was one of the sons of the Yanuka, the Frankfurt as we know him, and he played an instrument. And the instrument he played was violin, and his violin was brought to him, and as he lay there bleeding, he played this number. Now, the Koyach Soif that the world knows, more people in the world know, and this Koyach Soif I just want to make a little mention about. I think it was about 5 years ago on Rosh Hashanah, and I'm sure there'll be people who correct me if I'm wrong, because you'll know what I'm talking about. I was at the second night of Rosh Hashanah, which is when we have a tish, a gathering in Yerushalayim with the Rebbe, and as the group has grown larger, so the gathering has moved outdoors into the yard of the main shul of Karlin in Yerushalayim, and we started to sing this song, and at some point I said, "Wait a minute, this is not the way we sing it. Something changed here." So afterwards, I went over to somebody who was one of the people who would, I guess, maybe likes to think he's one of the people, those who understand the music of the court, and I asked him, what was that little change in what we call alakot? What was that little change? So he said, oh yes, somebody was listening to the tape of Moshe Melamed singing Chayach, which is Professor Melamed's father, and they found that it made more sense when he sang the way he sang it, and so that's why we changed it to fit that more. Now, what might be the find of this whole expedition, a short, titled a short Hasidic dance tune. This was found in a different collection, and this was sung by somebody named Beryl Kabilansky, who was a member of the Stolin congregation in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Not a lot is known about him, but he was perhaps one of the founding members of the congregation, and what they called back then the Chevra, or the society of Hasidei Karlin-Stolin. one more, dance, Tanznigen, which I found today when I was looking through some of the notes that I have, and I found that I said, this has to be played, and I have to play it tonight because it was Yitzhak's Professor Melamed's father who composed it, so Moshe Melamed. The next is another song. It's specifically sung on Friday night in Mayididus, and I would say we have a quite large treasury of Mayididus and this one was from the time of Detroit, from the Detroit himself. Short piece is also something that it was not a new find, but it was quite enjoyable to hear it in the sound archives of YIVO, and it is a sample of what we call a Lag BaOmer Tanz, which is sung, some say for 20 minutes, but it's actually sometimes sung for an hour or an hour and a half or even more. Both, well, I shouldn't say both, in all Karliner communities on Lag BaOmer, both at night, during the day, and of course in Meron, where Hashem Baruch Chai is.
Thank you so much. It's 8:25, so we're a little bit, a little bit late. But we have time for like 2 questions. I think we all really enjoyed this evening. It was that marriage of the history and live culture and the communication between the original community and the scholars that we like to cultivate here at YIVO. But we have time for 2 questions. Yes, Mr. Rothman.
You mentioned that a number of these musical pieces were accompanied by dance, and I wondered whether the dance was regularized, and if so, anyone made a record of it, of the dance.
You mean the actual music or the word?
You mentioned a number of the pieces that you
Yes.
played were accompanied by dancing.
Yes.
And I wondered whether this was regularized pattern dancing, and if so, whether anyone studied it or recorded it.
Well, in terms of it being any type of particular folk dance, it was just a regular, your basic round dance. Although I will say there was a kind of a variation on the round dance, which I think the Hasidim here in America and other parts have picked up from Jerusalem, from Yerushalayim, which is the manner in which they do it with a kind of certain type of jump. And that is actually, if I'm not mistaken, is from what I've seen, is actually exclusive to the Middle East, not just Israel.
Was it done at the very beginning of the Karliner
That I don't know.
Hasidim?
That I wouldn't know.
Second question?
How large is the community, the present community in Detroit?
Detroit.
About Houseman? Do you know?
There isn't really much left in Detroit.
Because the Rebbe's buried in Detroit.
He was there then, there was a community then, a very active community, that he was visiting them, and he died there suddenly. And he was buried there. But even at the time, it was slowly petering out, but over the 50s and 60s, definitely in the 70s, the older people passed on, the younger people were not really part of it. They either assimilated or they weren't subscribing to the same thing.
So there's no community left.
Well,
There's no active community. We
Is
do
there a
go-
steeple in Detroit?
The building is standing, but it doesn't serve as a studio.
Okay, one more question. The lady in the second row. Yes.
I was very taken, Professor Melamed, with your story about the search for the archives of the Soviet apparatchiks were chasing it. Could you tell us when the find was at the Yitzhak, or could you tell us something else about it?
So you're asking about what we know right now. So I've been trying to help work in this search for the past 8 years. The point is that the story of the Karliner collection is extremely important, but it's actually a part of a wider story of quite a few other Hasidic schools and dynasties which are looking for their own treasures and their own collections. Now we are talking about, I would say, dozens, I think, And what I learned while working on that, I basically adopted a second career for the past 8 years. It's kind of a Jewish Indiana Jones. And what I learned is the following. I mean, first of all, we have, in terms of the Jewish items that were confiscated by the Nazis, we have a clear split between those the items that were after the war confiscated by the Allies and then went through Offenbach. Even with those items, we don't know much about what happened to them. So just this day, after 7 years of working with it, I learned that there is a small catalog that was used in Offenbach that is just for religious items. There is one. There should be.
What is Offenbach? Not everybody knows what
Offenbach is the place where the Nazis assembled the largest collection, the largest library of Jewish books ever assembled. It was a collection of more than 2 million books. Never there was. I don't think that the National Library of Jerusalem is still coming to these numbers, or close to that perhaps. But the largest library of Jewish studies, as far as I know, of Judaica, was assembled by the Nazis. Was assembled in, was concentrated in Offenbach next to Frankfurt, and a team of Jewish American officers in the army started processing these items in 94, 95, 96, 97. They worked for 3 months at the beginning. They were asked to give a report how long it would take them, and they basically calculated that given the fact that they were working just a certain number, it would take them something like 75 years, right? And they were told, we give you 20 people to work, but we cannot continue with that. And so what they started doing, instead of writing down the specific items, they started shipping the books as in huge crates of 500 books. Now, the good possibility is, so here's, well, let's do something even more simple. The Nazis didn't destroy, or rarely destroyed, Jewish books. For the most part, I mean, if the books were destroyed, they were destroyed in bombardments, but all the burnings were a show. They were interested in creating the collection of Jewish books in order to have whatever kind of research. They knew virtually nothing. I mean, we're talking about their researchers that are, it's the cheapest kind of academics that you can imagine. But the point was that they didn't destroy. We have a huge collection that was in Offenbach at the end of the war. One possibility is that the stolen items went through this place, and then we need, I think the key to that is actually lying probably in the National Archives in Washington, because there's supposed to be one item that is supposed to catalog their religious collections. I was not aware of that till 4 hours ago. Okay. The other possibility.
Those volumes, the
That's
stamps,
right.
the library stamps.
Well, yeah, but I knew about the library stamps, but the library stamps, so far I knew about 3 volumes of the library stamps. And then someone told me, no, there is a 4th one. We don't know whether it survived, but we know that there was one. It is supposed to be, in the National Archives. No one saw it, but okay, let's see. I mean, that if it exists, it would be extremely important. The other possibility is far worse. I mean, if the books ended in the East, it's insane. We are talking right now about huge amount of Jewish books. I'm talking about millions of Jewish books and manuscripts all over East Europe. Even in places which are relatively catalogued. So just think about St. Petersburg. We don't know how many items we have there, and even those items are not properly catalogued. What is happening in Belarusia is probably even worse. A colleague of ours by the name of Yochi Berman went 15 years ago searching for the Karliner manuscript for the same collection. He went to the archives of the Red Army in Moscow and found a huge trove of Hasidic manuscripts related to Lubavitch, nothing of Karlin, but if that's what you find in one local archives of the Red Army in Moscow, then there is a good chance that if you go to some other archives of the Red Army in Smolensk or in other places, you'll find some more materials. What is really needed now is a systematic survey of East European Jewish books and manuscripts. I mean, it's a work that needs to be done. It's not a little bit, it's a lot of work, but without that, you cannot bring closure to World War II. We are talking about huge, and I'm stressing that, huge amounts of Jewish books and manuscripts. And I think it's basically, it's the more responsibility and a moral duty of our generation to try to push in order to get, again, I'm not talking about restitution, I just want to know where are the items.
Well, thank you very much.